there, this is X-Rays, where knowledge meets inspiration in the intricate dance of industry evolution. Thanks for joining us today because we'll be with a strong advocate for total quality management, knowledge sharing, mentoring, and future-ready leadership. I'm talking about none other than Ian Erskine. He's here to tell us something many organizations are asking about, the revised ISO 14001-2026 standard. What's changed? What has not? And how does environmental sustainability fit into a much bigger picture that includes governance, ethics, biodiversity, changes to the climate, ecosystem health, and resource management? For those of you tuning in for the first time, he's the managing director and CEO of ACI Global and e-Quip, who has spent more than 4 decades helping organizations around the world improve their quality, achieve sustained success, and strengthen their people and systems. Hi, Ian.
Hi, Miles, and good day to everyone. And I trust everyone had a wonderful weekend. And as for you, Miles, you had a lovely
Thank
Father's
you.
Day and celebrated that. And no, wonderful. And yeah, now that's a very interesting question because little has changed. Now, what they do say is that they have added a requirement, but this is rather mystifying for myself because whilst it adds a specific additional clause, the problem I have with that is that, well, that's fine. It talks about, how you plan your environmental aspects and so forth. But as all good auditors would know, and even people that are using standards within their own business systems, they would know that that has already been addressed and has been addressed in the existing requirements anyway. 6.1.4 to be specific.
Mhm.
And but I always find it a little intriguing. In some respects, I wish they wouldn't use words that are a little bit out there in reference to environmental aspects. And often I still get this question: what does aspects actually mean? Now,
Uh-huh.
aspects actually means environmental issues. As we talk in TQM, Total Quality Management, we talk about quality issues. And that's where I say, well, that's where it becomes key because if you address the issues, you actually won't get into a situation where you've then got to raise a non-conformance or you've got to then fill out a safe work method statement addressing this and things like that because you address them at the very first point when you notice them. And again, that's where we talk about foreseeable risk. Okay, and the key thing in reference to foreseeable risk is it foreseeable? Now, when we talk about foreseeable, we talk about, okay, so if there's an issue, can you see it?
Mhm.
If it's an issue, can you smell it? Is it an odor that might cause an explosion? Can you feel it? Is there something there that should not be right? And they're the key things that you have to address when you're addressing aspects, or as I call it, issues.
Mhm.
And again, the most important thing there to remember is just don't look at it in isolation. You have to look at how the environmental issues are going to affect your business as you plan forward, but most importantly, the effect it will have on your business outcomes.
Mhm.
So yeah, so a very important question, and yes, the only thing it's really just an additional thing to, I guess, bring people back to remind them that this should have already been addressed when you've been looking at all your overall risk within your business, right?
Mhm.
And how you plan to address the issues caused.
Mhm. Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Ian, for kicking this off by sharing the biggest changes business should pay attention to and how does the new planning approach make environmental management easier to understand and fit into everyday operations. So, let's talk about one of the strongest themes in ISO 14001-2026 standards, which seems to be a broader approach to environmental sustainability. How does the updated standard, Ian, encourage organizations to think about changes to the climate, biodiversity, ecosystem health, and resource management?
Well, this is a very interesting question and well thought out as well. Now, this is where, again, I go back to my statement where I made. nothing has changed apart from a separate addition to remind you to plan for your environmental aspects or your environmental issues, right?
Mhm.
Now, within your issues, exactly what you've just mentioned there, we talk about biodiversity, changes to the climate. We talk about ecosystem health, resource efficiency, lifestyle cycle management, all those. Now, people are now saying, oh, this is all incredibly new and so forth. Whereas I take people back, no, go back to what we talked about when we were talking about the environmental aspects, the issues.
Uh-huh.
Now, if you're going to address your issues, sorry, what are you going to address? Aren't you going to address those five or six things which I just mentioned? Ecosystem health, resource efficiency, life cycle management, changes to the climate and biodiversity? Of course you are. That's the issues that you have to address. So they've been there all the time. The only thing, in some respects, what ISO has done, and I think this is to address the lazy auditor or people that are lazy within their business, they're not really addressing what the requirement asks you to do,
Mhm.
right? But again, the point I also make, whilst this is a requirement, it's not a binding requirement, it's not a compliance requirement. The key there is you address your environmental issues or aspects in determining your business outcomes.
Uh-huh.
That way, what I'm saying there is put the guidelines aside, right? What it says there, you need to address that in reference to achieving your business outcomes, right? So even if you didn't have the standard, that is a requirement. And that's supported and backed up by when you look at the legal requirements. And in Australia, we have the Environmental Protection Agency, the EPA, right?
Uh-huh.
Now, I have some significant issues with this organisation because it appears they don't even know their own guidelines. And they're going to organisations, and I just did a major transfer station last week, and
Mhm.
their biggest issue is understanding the interpretation of the guidelines
Uh-huh.
and things like that. And that's where it becomes a little bit difficult, and that's where you've got to look in a lot deeper, and then you've got to see how the organisation is actually performing against its expected guidelines, but above
Mhm.
all, its own business outcomes, right, which must be put in place to address its legal and regulatory requirements. And
Mhm.
that's how all those key so-called new ones coming in, but the life cycle one, and we'll address that a little bit later down because I think the world as a whole has some major issues in reference to life cycle.
Uh-huh.
But anyway, we'll address that a little bit later.
Yes. Perhaps, Ian, you could share some examples that show why understanding the relationship between a business and its surrounding environment matters more than ever.
Again, a very interesting one. Well, let's address life cycle.
Uh-huh.
And, one of the major ones is plastics, right?
Yes.
Now, again, and I'm glad you actually reiterated that because it's a very important one. And I get people to start from home. Okay. Now, here in Australia, we recycle three different categories: general waste, and
Mm-hmm.
that's the very difficult one, right? Um, and general waste just goes into landfill, right?
Mm-hmm.
Then the other one is recycling, right?
Mm-hmm.
You have your bottles, your plastics, and so forth. And that's where there is some issues because some of the plastics you cannot recycle. Now,
Right.
I'm not sure other countries have this same issue, but in Australia, there are some plastics which we can't recycle. So those plastics wrongly have to go into landfill,
Mm-hmm.
right? Now, the other one is green waste, where you have your lawn clippings, your fallen leaves, your scraps, and things like that. And this is the interesting one. When I say to people, I say, well, why do you put your scraps in your garbage bin? If you've got a garden, why don't you put them into your garden? Because they create worms which fertilize the garden, right? And things like that. And even lawn clippings and leaves, why don't you mulch them up and put them onto your garden?
Mm-hmm.
Right? But going back to landfill, And we basically have virtually nothing going into our landfill. But when I have a look at the transfer station that I did last week, the amount that's going into landfill because it can't be recycled, it can't match that life cycle process, right? And can't be reused. The amount of stuff that's now going into landfill is horrendous. Now, what I say, and I'm going to be taking this higher up to the regulators and my local member of parliament and asked a question, do you realise that there's a significant of stuff that is being handled throughout the workplace that cannot be recycled, so it can't match that life cycle management process, and it
Mm-hmm.
goes into landfill. And what I saw last week shocked me because a lot of the plastics that are being used to wrap, for argument's sake, furniture, new furniture bundles and things like that you buy, and
Mm-hmm.
things like that. And the other one that struck me was there's a fair bit of timber that can't be recycled because it has been treated with
Coated.
chemicals,
Mm-hmm.
right? Now, what I'm saying, this is where I think governments and regulators, but particularly governments, need to step up here and say, look, hold on, we have to restrict as much as possible and reduce our input into landfill because what you've got to consider is what happens when that stuff goes into landfill? Now, this is, again, I'm glad you reinforced this because if you look at, for argument's sake,
Mm-hmm.
solar panels have a fairly short life cycle period. They only last no more than 10 to 15 years. Now, the problem I have, after 15 years, where do those solar panels go? They can't go into landfill because they go into landfill, the chemicals that have been put in to producing them, the minerals and so forth, leach out into the soil and poison the soil.
Mm-hmm.
Number one, right? So that's the first issue that I have with solar panels. You can't recycle them. You can't put them in the landfill. So what are we going to do with them?
Yeah.
Okay. Now, the other one that troubles me, for argument's sake, is electric vehicles. Electric
Mm-hmm.
vehicles have major big batteries in them, right? They
Mm-hmm.
are built with very dangerous minerals and chemicals, right? And again, electric vehicles only have a very short life cycle,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, while it's an electric vehicle, you don't have any CO2 emissions,
Yeah.
but what a lot of people don't realise with a fossil fuel manufactured motor car, right, they are all now fitted with what they call catalytic crackers, right?
Okay.
Now, what happens there is it's a little addition to the exhaust system, much closer up to the engine, right?
Okay.
Does it forces the exhaust gases to be burnt at a much higher temperature, which
Mm-hmm.
burns out the emissions. So when it comes out the exhaust, there is virtually no CO2 emissions coming out that exhaust pipe,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, so if you put those two together, the life cycle span of a fossil fuel motor car is hugely more than an electric vehicle, right? So
Mm-hmm.
that's what you have to look at, okay?
Yeah.
Because that's the question I'm now asking
Yeah.
organisations. Okay, so if you have a fleet of electric vehicles, what happens when they are sent back in and resold, right? What
Mm-hmm.
happens to that battery? Okay. What happens to that vehicle
Mm-hmm.
at its end of life, which is much shorter than a fossil fuel car? But the
Uh-huh.
battery is the thing that concerns me,
I
right?
understand.
And then you have the wind turbines. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
The recycling of a wind turbine has to be done after 10 or 15 years. You can't recycle the blades, you can't recycle the oil. And then again, where do they go? Going back to what I'm saying, governments have to step up and say, right, we have to put measures in place
Mm-hmm.
where we look at restricting what goes into landfill, right? And this is where I am rather critical of governments, and this is all around the world. You can see it because when we went on our overseas trip last year to the UK, I found significant areas where, okay, there's hundreds and hundreds of turbines.
Mm-hmm.
So in 10, 15 years' time, what do you do with those wind turbine
Sure.
blades?
Mm-hmm.
And again, that's what I'm saying. The life cycle is the issue which I think has to be addressed, but it can't just be addressed by the people themselves because there's issues there because you can't recycle a lot of the stuff that we're being imposed upon.
Mm-hmm.
So this comes back to regulation and things like that.
Yeah.
So
Well,
it is an issue.
yeah, really interesting, Ian. I mean, not everyone knows that. I think this discussion is something everyone can relate to, but have to really understand on a deeper level. And it's critical, as you said, whatever business we're talking about, even when dealing with things at home, the environment and business performance in general are no longer separate conversations. And that brings us to another interesting shift. Environmental management today isn't just about pollution control anymore. How are concepts like the due diligence governance framework, principles, ethics, culture, risk based thinking, and even policies such as modern slavery policy and code of conduct policy becoming part of environmental management? And why are these areas now essential ingredients for sustained success rather than simply compliance exercises?
Well, in some respects, I just wonder in some why certain organisations emphasise this and others don't. I go about this in a different tact, and it even includes foreseeable risk and thinking about risk taking and things like that. Because and you have to understand that running a business is a risk, so you have to take a level of risk which you can manage and control.
Okay.
But what I say to people, and again, it's going back to due diligence, culture, ethics, and doing the right thing. Now, if you go back to where we start from, and we often talk about, okay, we look at the rule of law, primary duty of care, and chain of responsibility. If you have that correct within your business and everyone is living, breathing, and walking those three key elements, ethics will handle itself. You'll be looked upon as an ethical organization because your people are ethical, right?
Mm-hmm.
And just staying on that for a little bit, because often I hear people, oh, how do you actually gauge ethics and culture? And I say, to me, it's quite easy because you look at how that organisation not only is perceived, but how that organisation is promoting itself throughout the inner society around them. Okay, it's a bit like the transfer station that I did last week. They actively look for feedback from the people that are living around the transfer
Mm-hmm.
station. They actively looking for getting their feedback. And this is how you then determine, well, okay, and then you do your research and you do look at some of the research and look for, have there been any major issues within the broader community in a certain place?
Mm-hmm.
And well, hang on, yes, there's been a major environmental spill. I wonder where that environment spill came from. Then you look at that, and if it had come from the transfer station or another organisation, right, you would then want to look at, yeah, okay, so what did actually happen? So this is where you then put all those together, and then it makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and again, the old adage that I say to most people is, does it look right? Because if it doesn't look right, more often than not, it is not right
Right. Mm-hmm.
and needs to be addressed.
Right. I agree. And it's just amazing, Ian, how these topics all connect. They really seem to influence the overall quality of an organization and how resilient it becomes over the long term. And a lot of organizations worry that revisions automatically mean greater complexity, but from what we're hearing, ISO 14001:2026 is actually designed to improve usability. How do the updated terminology and harmonized structure make it easier for businesses to integrate environmental management with quality, health and safety, and total quality management initiatives without creating unnecessary layers of administration?
Well, this is again a very good question, and this is where organisations actively need to integrate everything in together. So you treat quality, you treat environmental, you treat health and safety, you treat information security such as personal information and things like that. Corporate responsibility, you also look at that. And that's probably a very important one because that's how you demonstrate you're maintaining your culture, okay? And you set yourself important guidelines and principles which you live by and work for and achieve. And, if you're actively working as a team, so everyone is working together, the old adage about the rowboat, you're all rowing at the same pace. And, if there's three or four people rowing at a faster pace, well, you've got to do your darndest to row as fast as they can as well, right?
Right.
And things like that. So that's where the integration of systems, right? And also, this is where it's very important. This is where also you must ensure you have an integration of cultures because our workforces now are being joined and made up of lots of different cultures, right? And this is where you have to actively work together to understand different cultures and different languages and things like that. And that also is a challenge today because the world today has, I guess, over the last 20 years, relaxed a lot of their immigration rules and so forth, where we have a lot of different cultures, right? But that is often a very, very good thing. In some respects, there can be some bad situations within that, but different cultures you have to address that not just within the broader community, you have to address that within your organization as well,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because it doesn't matter what culture you come from or background you have to abide by your organization's culture, its principles, its values, and how it actually deals with rule of law, chain of responsibility, and primary duty of care. So that's where they come into, and culture is, and in some respects this is where it can be a bit of a challenge because in some areas around the world environmental issues are not handled very well at all, right?
Yeah.
But again, I think the world as a whole is moving towards a situation where that is gradually becoming addressed,
Mm-hmm.
and the ramifications are quite serious. And look, I have been involved in some of those ramifications
Mm-hmm.
where the remediation work is quite extensive, but you have to fix up. If you've had a spill or you've messed up somewhere, you have to put in remediation work to ensure that it's brought back as better or even not better than it was before.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you're right, Ian. I'm just glad that more and more organizations are focusing also on not just their business success of, earning revenue, the profit and all that, but they're also focused on sustainability and, of course, taking care of the environment. And culture indeed has to be integrated into the organization. Now, for organizations already certified to ISO 14001 2015, what hasn't changed, Ian? How straightforward should the transition really be? And what does it say about an organization's auditors, consultants, or business systems if key elements are only being discovered now rather than having embedded all along?
Very good question. And when I sort of come across our briefing notes that we work on together to achieve this podcast, I had a wry grin on my face. And yes, well, literally nothing has changed. I
Okay.
think what has changed is ISO has, because some of the things that are happening are against principles and are against the addressing of environmental aspects, the issues, so to speak. So, as we've said, nothing has changed basically, but what has changed is there's a slightly stronger emphasis on thinking about your environmental aspects or your issues, as I call about it, and addressing those issues. And again, this is where I'm taking all my organisations. Okay, let's have a look at how you address all your environmental aspects and your issues within your business. And if they don't come up and when they don't talk about biodiversity, they don't talk about life cycle and things like that, and managing those processes, I say, well, hold on a minute. Let's have a look at how you recycle, for argument's sake, steel filings and things like that from a machine shop. Okay. And let's have a look. And again, I'll give you an example of another one of the companies that I do. It's a plastics user that uses plastics to actually build and mold bumper bars for vehicles and things like that. So what happens when a smashed bumper bar comes in? They don't just throw it into the garbage, right?
Mhm.
They actually put it through a chipping machine, chip it all up, send it away to be manufactured again, and then it comes back to them.
Mhm.
That's where you get your life cycle. Right?
Yeah.
So, yes, look, as I said, virtually nothing has changed. There is a slightly greater emphasis put on specific issues. Now, that's a deliberate reflection of wanting to do better. And
Mhm.
I think that's a good thing. But
Yeah.
where I am perturbed, and I do get perturbed, is when certain organisations are running around and saying, no, no, you've got to introduce technology, you've got to introduce AI, you've got to do carbon sinks and match and try to direct where the CO2 is going. None of that's in the standard, right?
Mhm.
What is in the standard, as I repeat, is you have to address your environmental aspects or issues
Mhm.
on a case by case basis. And again, that's where I get people to have a look at the life cycle, for argument's sake, of their vehicles. And I often remind people because often we are accused of driving around in fossil fuel vehicles, which are so-called supposedly dirtying the planet. Well,
Yeah.
in actual fact, they're not, because firstly, all fossil fuel motor vehicles, as I said, are fitted with catalytic crackers, right?
Mhm.
And even most of them now, most of the modern vehicles have a little gauge at the edge of their exhaust pipe
Mhm.
to determine if there has been an issue with the catalytic cracker. You have to take your vehicle back and get it reassessed and maintained and fixed. But just staying on this, because I think it is very important that organisations and people do not get hoodwinked in the need for additional training and additional courses and things like that. That's not necessary. The
Mhm.
only thing that is necessary is we all need to concentrate a little bit more on, and in some respects, heavier on addressing specific environmental issues,
Yeah.
aspects, right? And ensuring that you do that on a case by case basis. And I go back to what I said before. Start looking at how you handle your environmental issues at home.
Mhm.
It's even little things like when you buy your
Right.
fruit and you do your peels and things like that. Well, you don't put your peels into the garden, but they can go into your green waste, right? And things like that. And your plastic bottles, recycle them. Don't throw them into general garbage and things like that. And the challenge I have now for everyone, and one of the takeaways I want to do from this podcast, the takeaway to me will be for everyone to concentrate on life cycle.
Mhm.
Concentrate on, wow, it's not plastic, it's not glass, it's not steel, it's not this. It's very light plastic sheeting. If I put that in the general waste, that's going to
Mhm.
go into landfill. You have
Yeah.
to now, I want people to actively be questioning what they're putting in general waste so that we actively work at bringing down what goes into landfill.
Mhm.
And on that, one of the things that I don't know whether you have this over in Mexico, or it'd be interesting to hear from people from other parts of the world come back and respond to my question here is my
Mhm.
question is in reference to what is going into landfill. This is where I'd like to see technology step up. Now, I know for a fact that we have in Sydney, we have an
Mhm.
organisation that is actively looking at putting stuff that generally goes into landfill, they're putting
Mhm.
it through a very, very big furnace and they're
Oh,
burning it. Now, one of the complications of that is, okay, so if you burn it, okay, and there's chemicals in that timber and so forth, is the heat right? And are they getting that from a point where it's not going to poison the atmosphere?
yeah.
Now, I've done a little bit of research on this and I'll be doing more, but I
Mhm.
feel that's what we need to do as a people is to, through our governments and our elected officials, is to get people to come up with a technology fix so that, for argument's sake, landfill doesn't it, recycling doesn't go into landfill anymore. It actually
Mhm.
goes to where there's a furnace, it's burnt, right? And
True.
also, when you stop and think about it, if it's done correctly, that burning, which generates heat, can generate energy
Energy.
and then goes into our grid.
Mhm.
Now, that's where I think we've got to get smarter, but this is where I'd like to see people drive this because it can't just be businesses, but
Mhm.
people can drive this and say, no, I'm not putting that into landfill because
Mhm.
it shouldn't go into landfill.
Mhm. Right. Thank you for that clarity, Ian. That's actually reassuring because when people hear new standard or revised standard, they often think, oh no, more paperwork. But it sounds like the foundation remains the same, just with clearer guidance and a stronger focus on life cycle thinking and practical implementation. Standards
Yes,
should really never be about ticking boxes, indeed. Everyone really has to address and deal with their environmental issues or aspects. We start it at home basically. We have to make it part of our everyday routine. So,
yes, very well put, Miles. And I'm going to put on our website under during after this podcast with the briefing notes. I'm going to put a couple of links for people where they can actually see where I was talking about the cobalt mining
yeah.
and and the bulldozing of Mount Kosciuszko and things like that, where the regulators have got it completely wrong, where they've turned a blind eye and allowed
Mhm.
that to happen. Whereas generally with business, there's no such thing as turning a blind eye. They wave the big stick and they close you down if you're not doing correctly.
Mhm.
And again, I look back at what has happened in throughout the world, and yeah. But I'll have a couple of those links, but I'll also have a link which takes people to this organisation that is going to is planning to put a significant amount of landfill material through a furnace. I'll have that also underneath our podcast, and I'd love people to be able to give me feedback on that because I think that's where we all can actually raise the issue to prevent stuff going into landfill.
Right. The government, businesses, us individuals have to be responsible enough to work together for the planet. So thank you so much again, Ian, for simplifying what could easily become a very technical discussion and showing that ISO 14001 2026 is really about helping organizations and individuals protect the environment while improving performance and building credibility. What a great
Thank you,
conversation.
Miles. And next week's episode will be on the changes to the quality standard. And
Mm-hmm.
I'll be demonstrating even more so with the quality standard that basically there's been no change at all, apart
Okay.
from one simple word, ethics. They talk now within a quality organisation,
Mm-hmm.
you'll need to demonstrate that you do have certain things in place how you can manage ethics, and that's what we've explained today.
Yes. It's a pleasure, Ian. Thank you so much. I'm excited for that episode because it's like a smooth transition from this topic to a much deeper and bigger conversation. Thank you, Ian.
Thank you again.
For those of you looking for guidance on ISO 14001 2026, environmental management systems, auditing, mentoring, or broader organizational excellence, Ian and the team at ACI Global and e-Quip can certainly help. So check out the links below, and if you need to revisit this episode, simply go to their website aciglobal.com.au because you'll find it there as well. So thank you, Ian. This has been your host, Miles. Stay focused, driven, and inspired with X-Raced.